What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguised Coverage, the only show that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, 2_ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguised Coverage, I am piggybacking a bit on last week's episode of Disguised Coverage. One of my favorite episodes that I've ever done had JP Acosta on from SB Nation. And we went into detail, a lot of detail. It was the 2-hour episode, which isn't unheard of for this show, but with a guest for the entirety of the episode, it kind of is. So huge shout out to JP again. But JP and I dove into how the Buffalo Bills 2024 offense can adapt and evolve. And in that episode last week, we really went into who the Bills were last year, the changes that the offense has undergone this offseason, what that means for 2024, and then putting all of that within or against the backdrop of current league-wide trends offensively and defensively. And it was a great conversation, and I wanted to piggyback off of some of that for this episode and really just focus, I should say, on the run game aspect of it. We talked about it a bit last week, but I wanted to dive into some more pieces because there are some things that I wanted to hit, some things I wanted to wrap up, some loose ends to tie together. And that's what this episode will focus on. So again, we're going to dive into a bunch of pieces from the Bills 2023 run game from a metrics perspective and from a schematic X's and O's perspective, put that together with what we've seen from this offseason, and then put that against the backdrop again of league-wide trends, changes, how the Bills fit into that positively and or negatively, what teams to look for or glean information from in terms of roster construction and on-field execution and design that could potentially give us some breadcrumbs or clues in terms of what the Bills will look like this year. So that is going to be focus for this episode. Man, 2 minutes and 28 seconds in, I flubbed my first word already. Man, I'm disappointed in myself. And as always, for those tuning in live to this episode, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, beliefs, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, whatever have you, throw it up into the live chat as we go along. I try to bring up anything and everything I can. Super chats, of course, get priority because I respect a monetary donation, but also because the color attracts my eyes and pulls me away from my notes. So again, anything you got, throw it up into the chat. I'll bring it up as we go forward. I like to make the show as engaging as possible. Appreciate Steve coming in early, dropping a like on the show before we even went live. Appreciate you, Steve. Cam Mori, regular viewer saying, I need more muffins where the blueberries are evenly distributed. I will. Bruce Nolan posted something on Twitter, I think last week or maybe the week before, where he got a blueberry muffin and the blueberry distribution was not equal. And he sent me a picture of it and tagged me in it. I was pretty happy with that. What's up, RJ? RJ saying, hey, everyone, hoping James Cook can learn how to not drop every important touchdown catch he gets thrown. He traditionally has not been a dropper of the football. I think I know because I did a show earlier today with Joe Marino. His career drop rate at Georgia, I think, was like 1.5%. His highest individual season was 5.9%, and he literally had one drop that season. Again, drop percentage is obviously from an overall volume and target standpoint. So the 5.9% seems even worse than just the overall volume, which is just one drop versus how much he was targeted and throwing the ball. But yeah, I think a lot of the dropsies issues with James Cook really does center around the notion of they weren't just like, oh, he dropped, one pass on a first down in a game that didn't really matter. It's always like he dropped this touchdown. He dropped this touchdown. He dropped this ball in this high leverage situation in a game that really mattered. I think the Eagles one is still the biggest one. And as RJ says, James Cook only drops important catches for some reason. He's made some big ones too. Some catches that have really mattered, but it's something that I'm not overly concerned about because I don't think having the drops or the dropsies is something that's really indicative of who he is as a player. Again, who knows? Maybe it's in his head now and we'll see what happens going forward. But I'm not too worried about it. I think it'll be fine going down the road. But I know it's something that a lot of people are latching on to. Chief comes in and says, Ray Davis receiving back season. Man, this is an aspect of Ray Davis's game. Eric and I talked about it last week in the film room. I don't want to actually, I think it might be my favorite part of Ray Davis's game. It's an aspect that I think is really underrated. Just what he can do out of the backfield in terms of the screen game, in terms of releasing out of the backfield when he doesn't have to be part of the protection scheme. And even just running routes, like running rail routes up the sideline. His feel for leverage and space and coverage, I think is better than advertised when it comes to his game. I do think he's a guy you can put on the field and you're not necessarily tipping your hand in terms of whether it's going to be a run or a pass, which is something I really like. I forget all these. K. Mori saying the Miami drop didn't end up mattering. I forgot James Cook dropped a pass against Miami. Honestly, the only two I really remember are I know he had more than what I'm about to say, but I only really remember the Philly one, and which I guess technically did matter, but it was super early on in the game, so who knows. I remember the Philly one, and I remember the Dallas one. And you say that, yeah, neither did Dallas. I guess KC either. He dropped one against KC. I remember the touchdown up the seam against KC. I guess, yeah, all these drops, I think they don't register in my mind because I'm not too overly concerned. And the one that really mattered the most was the Philly one because they lost that game. But even that one, again, he shouldn't have dropped the ball. But I'm not raking him over the coals for the Philly game because that happened like first drive, definitely in the first quarter, but I think it was like the first drive against Philly. And there was so much left to go with that drive. Oh, nice. Nice job by the chat. K. Mori saying the KC playoff game, it was the drive with the Shakir touchdown, I think. And then Chief coming in saying he dropped the one versus KC, but a play later we scored. Oh, yeah. Good call. Well done. Man, that stupid KC game. Kansas City in the playoffs. Good times. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with James Cook this year. Obviously, he's going to be a focal point in this run game. I want to start out with some basic. Let me change the banner and brand here, breaking down the Buffalo Bills 2024 run game. I wanted to start out with some basic run stats for the Buffalo Bills from an advanced metrics perspective. I don't want to make it too, where I'm just reading off a ton of numbers, but there are some that I think are extremely relevant to this conversation. And again, frame just how good this Bills run game was last year in terms of individual play and in terms of just what they were able to do schematically. Now, another part of this conversation, which is something we've talked about on the show, is that the offensive line is going to be changing. Well, not is going to be changing, has changed. Mitch Morse going, Connor McGovern no longer being at left guard, and it looks like McGovern's going to be at center, Edwards at left guard. We'll see what happens and how that, really changes things. But this run game last year was strong in a way that I didn't necessarily anticipate. Just from an efficiency standpoint, a volume standpoint, and kind of no matter how you looked at it, they whatever metric you want to pull or grab, they really function in a lot of ways successfully. So overall, the Bills run game was 6th in DVOA. They were 2nd in EPA per attempt. They were 5th in EPA per attempt when you move QB scrambles. They were 7th in EPA per attempt for just running back carries only. And then if you want to focus on Josh Allen and what he does in the run game, overall, he was 3rd in EPA per attempt for quarterbacks amongst 29 QBs with at least 30 attempts. He was 2nd in EPA per attempt for QBs when you remove scrambles amongst 41 QBs with at least 10 attempts. And then this is an interesting one. He was 15th in EPA per attempt for quarterbacks when it's just scrambles. Amongst 34 qualifying QBs with at least 10 attempts. I knew it wasn't great last year from a scrambling perspective, but really interesting when you put Allen's numbers within that run game conversation. Again, 3rd overall in EPA per attempt for QBs, 2nd in EPA per attempt on non-scrambles, and then 15th in EPA per attempt just on scrambles. And you, especially with how much man coverage the Bills saw last year, which was the most in the league, that's usually a recipe for Josh Allen taking off and making defenses pay for going man coverage. You're turning your back to Josh Allen. You are watching receivers and tight ends and running backs, and you're going downfield with them, and Allen breaks contain and takes off. We didn't see that a ton last year, at least from an EPA per attempt perspective, but he got more done in the design run game. I think that's going to be a factor this year. We talked about it on last week's episode, that +1 that he offers in the run game. It's a really nice piece that he adds there, and some of the numbers speak to that. And also some numbers that speak to the Bills run game that I wanted to pull up as I scroll through my notes. We talked about it a bit last week. The changing nature of the Bills running game, going from a zone based team who mixed in gap from time to time and really having almost close to a 50-50 split. They had a 46% gap run usage rate last year, which was third in the league. If you focus on just the Joe Brady weeks, which was from a regular season standpoint from week 11 through week 18, the Bills were at a 47% usage rate, which was also third. I expect that to stay pretty consistent. That gap versus zone scheme being near 50-50 for the Bills. One, because they can block that way. And even, again, now say, like we talked about, we remove Mitch Morse at center. We seemingly, take this with a grain of salt because camp can change things and preseason can change things. But you take Connor McGovern, you put him from left guard into center. You put David Edwards as, into left guard from being that sixth offensive lineman. Things change a little bit. I do think this offensive line can still get it done from a zone perspective. I don't think zone's going away. I think they're going to continue to run, especially with weak side mid zone. I think they'll be able to continue to lean into that. But I do think their bread and butter will be in those duo runs, those vertical displacement downhill at you type of runs. They'll run some pin and pull. They'll run some QB bash, some GT counter, guard tackle counter within that as well. And then you're going to see a play that we've talked about a million times on the show and in the film room, and I've talked about it on Twitter. That tackle wrap play, it's called dart, where Deion Dawkins is pulling or Spencer Brown is pulling, and the way they can dress that up, where Josh Allen keeps it, where it's a run fake, where he gives it to James Cook. That gap aspect is not going away. And again, gap runs versus zone runs. I think everyone kind of knows what a zone run is. If you don't, feel free to put it up into the chat when we talk about it. But those gap runs are counter, your pin and pull, your power, tackle wrap, dart, duo, even though it kind of looks like inside zone, it's not, slightly different. That's considered a gap run as well. And again, the whole nature of it and difference really is zone runs. There's no defined hole for the running back. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure. You'll say you're going wide zone to the right or outside zone, whatever have you. All the linemen are stepping in conjunction with each other, ideally at the same time and same pace, all to that right side. The running back gets the ball and just flows like water, picks whatever hole or lane or alley that develops, and he goes from there. Bit of a choose your own adventure. A gap scheme run has more of literally a designed gap or hole that you are running to. It's, hey, this play is going to get run between the right side guard and tackle. Hey, this play is running into a hole between the center, right side guard and the center. Like, that's where you're going, right? So that type of stuff. And that's the main difference between gap and zone. I do think, again, like we talked about last week, as teams built themselves defensively to stop wide zone runs, to get lighter, to get faster, to be able to play the pass, to get after the quarterback, we've seen less, three linebacker sets, and we've seen less big, heavy interior defensive linemen. Teams have gotten lighter up front with the idea of penetrating and being able to pressure the quarterback from the interior. They've replaced, 3-down linebacker sets with nickel defenses and dime defenses, or, if you want to get heavy on defense, you go with more of a big nickel type of scenario where it's maybe a safety that's in there or a bigger bodied slot defender. At the end of the day, defenses have swung that pendulum back in their favor by limiting explosives for the opponent and being able to put a cap on offenses. And so offenses are starting to swing things back in their favor by running right at those smaller, faster, lighter, pass-based or pass-oriented defenses in terms of how things have been built. And so again, gap scheme runs usually attack that. And when you take that gap scheme conversation, again, Bills 46% gap run rate in 2023, and then you take a look just at James Cook, second most gap scheme runs amongst running backs in 2023. Again, makes sense with how much duo and tackle wrap they ran. Add in Ray Davis. 127 gap runs in 2023 versus 67 zone. And like we showed in the film room last week with myself and Eric, he does have an affinity for those gap runs. He's not horrible in zone, but he looks significantly better when it comes to those gap scheme runs, how he adjusts his track, how he paces himself, how he sets his blocks up, the vision that he has. It pairs really nice with the gap scheme. And then his size and frame, I think, also helps speak to that in terms of get him downhill, get him north and south, allow him to break arm tackles and go through shoulders and stuff like that. And then you have Ty Johnson, more gap to zone runs as well last year. And he's got a high enough floor as an RB3 or RB2 that you can factor him in a variety of ways in a bunch of different pieces. Again, I do not think zone runs go away, but I think that near 50-50 split continues. And the major ones we continue to see are duo, dart, and then from a zone perspective, those mid-zone runs, particularly weak side mid-zone. If you want to see what a good weak side mid-zone run looks like, if you're a Bills fan, go back to that Bills-Chargers game from the night before Christmas Eve this past season. They ran it a ton. They are sending Trent Sherfield in jet motion, and whatever side he's going to, they're running it back the other side on that weak side. So go take a peek at that. It's basically literally just putting more bodies on the front side of the play where the strong side is, and then running away from the tight end and away from the numbers. And they're going weak side mid zone. And it worked well for the Bills in that game. That's a nice aspect that they have. I still think they're going to have that pivot, even with the changes in the offensive line. I am a little concerned just because, again, like I've talked about on the show and I talked about last week, like the Bills finally had consistency and like consistency from an above average quality play perspective last year in their offensive line, in pass protection, with their run blocking, the ability to have diversity to go gap and zone in a variety of ways. And then they didn't blow up the offensive line, but you do have 2 out of the 5 up front having significant changes. And again, I know Connor McGovern was a starter on this line last year, but going from left guard to center is a big change. And then Edwards is just a new body in there in general. But I would expect that near 50-50 split to stay consistent. I think the Bills are going to be one of the leaders in those gap scheme type of runs. But again, pairing that with the larger scale conversation league-wide, you are starting to see that more and more. Teams are going away from those zone runs. Again, I'm going to say this a whole bunch because this episode is kind of a connector piece or follow-up piece to tie up the loose ends for last week's episode. But like myself and JP talked about, Sean McVay, kind of that huge proponent of those wide zone runs. Even last year, you look at what the Rams were doing from a run perspective. And the Rams, again, zone team, specifically wide zone, outside zone, Sean McVay really leaning into that. The Rams last year had a 42% gap run rate, which was the 6th highest in the NFL. Even teams that are known predominantly for being heavy zone teams, they're starting to get closer and closer to a 50-50 split. And this is symptomatic of the league at large. Again, defenses built themselves to limit those outside plays. They got smaller, they got faster. You have different fronts, like the tight front that Brandon Staley instituted with the Rams as last year's defensive coordinator there, and then tried to institute when he was the Chargers head coach these past several seasons. All of these defenses and personnel groupings, all with the idea of, from a run perspective and from a run fit perspective, all with the idea of stringing out, lengthening these plays, not allowing these zone runs to kind of push that outside and then get upfield north and south quickly in between the tackles. The whole idea was you're trying to string everything out, lengthen everything, and allow your second and third level defenders to get there. So offenses were like, okay, cool. You want to get lighter. You want to get faster. You want to stop us from kind of pressing those outside corners and getting around the edge and getting north and south. Okay, we're just going to run right at you with your smaller base fronts. Defensive tackles have gotten more into the 300 and 305 pound range. So offensive linemen on the interior have started to get bigger. You're getting more people movers on the interior. You're getting more, let's run right at a defense. Oh, cool. You want to live in a nickel defense? You don't want to have 3 linebackers on the field. One of your main starters is going to be your nickel corner. Cool. Can he function in the run? This is also going to put a premium on guys like Taron Johnson and Mike Hilton and even Kenny Moore to a degree, who are able to function as pass defenders in the nickel spot in the slot, but also as legitimate run defenders in that slot spot as well, because teams are going to attack that. You know, if we're going to go 2 or 3 tight ends on the field, are you going to stay in nickel? Do you have a tight end do you have a nickel corner who can handle a tight end blocking him? Or if we're a bigger bodied wide receiver team, do you have a wide receiver? Do you have a nickel corner that can stand up to a bigger bodied wide receiver? If a team puts Keon Coleman, I'm just using him as an example because we're talking about the Bills. If a team has a Keon Coleman body type, do you have a nickel corner that can bang with him in terms of run defense and fitting the run? So all these questions that defenses are going to have to ask. Oh, I see some questions starting to come through. Let me grab some of them. Chief says, really weird question, but what's been more productive, tackles pulling or guards pulling? It really depends on team. Traditionally, it's a little bit of both. It's easier usually for guards to pull. If you're talking about the Bills, it's been tackles pulling, and it's just because of the athleticism of Deion Dawkins and the athleticism of Spencer Brown. You want those guys on the move, and I think especially too, if you look back last year on the Bills, McGovern isn't. He's not a horrible athlete, but being fleet of foot isn't his biggest, like, especially in juxtaposition with Mitch Morse. Like, you can move McGovern or get him on the move, but that's not necessarily his biggest strength. Whereas you look at Deion Dawkins, you look at Spencer Brown, especially Spencer Brown, those are dudes who are athletic, who can move, and who are physical at the same time. Those are dudes you want to pull. So it's really just leaning into your skill set when it comes to how you built your offensive line. But if we're talking Bills specific, they've been very, very, very productive pulling their tackles on those tackle wrap plays and those dart plays. Steve says, this is a good question from Steve. Steve says, will McGovern be able to pull like Morse, or are we going to see mostly the tackles pulling? I think it's still going to be the tackles pulling. I think they're going to lean into that tackle wrap, that dart concept. Again, if you want to know what that is, go watch the Dallas Cowboys game. The Bills ran this, oh boy, I would literally say probably like 25, 30 times. They just kept spamming it and running it left and running it right and running it left and running it right. And Dallas, I mean, kudos to the Bills, but I'm still so mad at Dallas for that game, for just not adjusting in any way, shape, or form. But I would expect to see the tackles pulling, even from a pin and pull perspective, and what they would do with Mitch Morse. Again, Morse is legitimately one of the best movement centers in all of football. So anybody you put at center to replace Mitch Morse is probably not going to be as good of a mover in space as he is. So I just wanted to put that out there. This isn't like a horrible knock on McGovern, but he's not going to be able to move like Mitch Morse. Because again, Mitch Morse is one of the best in that aspect and in that vacuum. So I do think he's good enough to get the job done in some ways, but I don't think the Bills are going to lean into those movement pieces with McGovern like they would with Mitch Morse. It's not necessarily a like for like replacement. They're similar in terms of overall size and overall frame. And even I think with how McGovern kind of shepherds people, he's more of an escort or shepherder of, I don't know if that's a word, of people and dudes up front than he is like a true people mover. And he anchors better than Mitch Morse, but I don't think he's going to be able to move like Morse. I would still expect to see them lean into, if they're going with pulls, you'll see some guard tackle stuff where they'll pull both dudes, or maybe they'll pull, McGovern from time to time with Dawkins or with Brown, or they'll pull Torrance and see something like that. But if we're talking from a volume perspective, and even probably from an effectiveness standpoint, I would expect to see the tackles continuing to do a lot of the heavy pulling type of work. I appreciate Linda with the Harry Potter reference here, saying Accio Super Bowl ring. I like that very much. If you don't get that reference, Google it. But Accio just means like it's a spell to bring something here. It's a Harry Potter reference. I like it. Like it a lot. Like it a lot. Coco Mung saying, does McGovern moving to center and Edwards at guard change the best fit running scheme? I spoke about it a little, I think before this comment came in, but I think it just helps them lean into more gap stuff. I think it's just more vertical displacement, more people moving ability, just because you don't necessarily have that athleticism that a Mitch Morse gives you. And Torrance isn't a bad mover, but his strength isn't being fleet of foot and out there moving in space. So I think this offensive line, while it does have two very athletic bookends in terms of Dawkins and Brown, I think having more gap scheme overall just fits this offensive line with how it currently looks, this, version of it. But I'm still expecting to see like a 50-50 ratio, just because zone runs are still kind of king in the NFL, maybe. And they're king because they are usually simpler to run. It's very rules based. It can work against a variety of fronts, even if a defense shifts or whatever they have going on. It's very, is there a guy in your gap? If there is, do this. If there's not a guy in your gap, do that. It's very rules based, simplistic, and it's easy to get everybody on the same page. In addition to some other things in terms of how you install it, but there's a lot of adaptability and versatility with it. So I don't think zone runs are going away. I do expect to see close to a 50-50 ratio overall for the Bills. Maybe you'll even see gap overtake zone, but that would still be a lot, I think. especially when you factor in stuff like QB sneaks and things and how those get graded and tracked by different sites that aggregate all this data and parse it out. But I do think the best fits for this run scheme are going to be duo and that tackle wrap stuff. Lonnie saying, who's the best blocking receiver on the roster? He hasn't played it down in the NFL. I kind of want to lean Keon Coleman. MVS isn't bad. Matt Collins is good. Curtis Samuel is not bad, actually. I know Joe Brady said today that Curtis Samuel, I either call him like the best blocker, best receiving blocker on the roster, or just talked about how good of a blocker he is. Samuel isn't bad either. Shakir got better last year. I kind of want to lean Keon Coleman here, though. Steve coming in saying Samuel's a great run blocker. I believe Coleman will be very solid as well. William says, do you think they start running behind Torrance more since he is that bigger body type? I'm very excited for year 2 Osiris Torrance. And yeah, I wonder how he factors in. From a people moving standpoint, Torrance and Spencer Brown on that right side of the line, man, they just create so much displacement. When I say displacement, for those who don't know, displacement is literally just like taking a defender and moving them out of their spot, like literally displacing them. And just what they can do in driving defensive tackles off the ball or defensive ends off the ball and climbing to the second level, the way they can cave in an entire side of the ball horizontally and or displace people vertically and create movement to allow running backs to get to the second level or get clean through the line. I do expect that. I think Torrance is going to be a real boon when it comes to the run game. I am trying to run. I mean, if we're looking at a strength overall in terms of like what side would you rather run behind, I would rather run to the right behind Osiris Torrance and Spencer Brown every single day. Spencer Brown, for all his struggles that he's had in pass protection this far in his career, he's really always been a solid run blocker just because of how athletic he is and because of how physical he is. And yeah, whether that means it's him on the move or it's running to his side and he's base blocking or, executing a double team and climbing to the second level. I would run behind Torrance more this year, especially when you talk about the whole pairing on that right side of Torrance and Brown. That's a very strong piece. Ralph Wilson saying Moore's just getting blown back into the path of the pulling tackles in the second half of the season. McGovern brings some heft at center. Yeah, he's just a better anchor in pass pro. And I think overall, like, you're trying to limit some of that knockback. I think a move from Morse to McGovern is a move to try and secure more of the depth of the pocket and prevent that type of leakage or knockback from a pass pro perspective or even from a run perspective as well. Claude saying, is the eventual plan SVPG at center and moving McGovern back to guard, or do you think McGovern at center is a permanent thing? So I got 2 thoughts on that. One comes from an interview. Connor McGovern did an interview before the draft talking about how at the end of, season meetings or kind of wrapping things up, end of season interviews, however you want to verbalize it, like he was spoken to about, or maybe it was some point before Morse got released. He had been spoken to about moving to center. So it was something that was already on his radar that he believed was going to happen. Now, he didn't know when Mitch Morse was going to go or how, and he was surprised that, Morse was cut and kind of how things went down. But it was already put on his radar in terms of moving to center. So I could easily see it being a permanent thing. I think Cedric Van Pran, I never get it right on the first try. That's why I'm just sticking to SVPG. I'm not even going to add the S. I'm just doing VPG for Van Pran Granger. That's it. So I think the drafting of VPG was just a value move because he was there. I do think he has a chance to start. And the reason I say that is just because he's got a multitude of paths to starting. He could either just ball out at center and it makes them think, man, wow, he's really playing great. Let's move McGovern back to left guard where we know he excels and where we know he's a known quantity there. Or McGovern could be doing really bad at center and they're like, you know what? This isn't working out. Let's get him back to left guard. VPG's playing fine and we can put him at center. Or maybe David Edwards just isn't cutting it at left guard and they say, you know what? Let's get McGovern back to left guard because VPG is playing better at center than Edwards is at left guard, and let's do that. So I do think there's several avenues and paths to playing time for VPG, but just based on the timeline and that interview with Connor McGovern, I could see it being a permanent thing. I don't think they draft, and again, maybe the thought changes because you don't know who's going to be there, but I don't think they're hesitant to have Connor McGovern be their long-term answer at starter. I do think they will put the best five out there, regardless of what it is. So again, if VPG just balls out in camp and at the preseason, or Edwards is slipping up a bit, or McGovern isn't looking good at center like they had hoped, and they want to move him back to left guard, I don't think they'll hesitate to change things, but I don't think they're putting McGovern. I don't think their move for McGovern at center was reactionary because they had to release Mitch Morse and they had to figure it out. I think this was somewhat planned. So I don't want to say permanent thing, but I don't think they're wary of keeping McGovern at center for the rest of his contract and for like the foreseeable future. If VPG balls out and beats him, cool, but I think they're comfortable with McGovern being at center. Joey coming in and saying, we won't know until mandatory practices come and everyone's there practicing. Van Pran Granger makes a move for the position. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I like VPG. Eric and I are doing a breakdown of him in the film room tomorrow, live at 5 p.m. Eastern, so feel free to check that out. I do like him. I didn't think he would be there in the 5th round, so I think that's good value. I think that's a good pick. I'm excited to see what happens with him because I did like his tape at Georgia. I saw a ton of games during the season, then obviously watched his tape going into the draft process, watched more of it once he got drafted. So I do like him. It'll be interesting to see again, because you basically have 3 dudes on the interior there between center and left guard, and it's just going to see whoever the best 2 work out is where the best 2 go. But I like that piece. So I mentioned some of the data pieces earlier. Again, EPA per attempt, DVOA, all that kind of stuff. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about was the hit at line percentage for the Bills running backs last year. This data is per Sports Info Solutions. So again, this is just the percentage of runs. This is literally what it is. The percentage of runs where the running back gets hit at the line of scrimmage. Actually, I have that for all positions right now. So let me filter just for running backs. So this is just percentage of runs where running backs are hit at the line of scrimmage. The Bills had the 2nd lowest hit at the line of scrimmage percentage on running back runs last year at 33.3%. The only team that had a lower rate was the Eagles at 32.3%. Number 3, so it was the Eagles had the lowest at 32.3, the Bills that had the 2nd lowest at 33.3, and then the Lions were 3rd at 36.4. And if anyone knows anything about the Eagles offensive line and the Lions offensive line, those are 2 of the best offensive lines in football from a coaching standpoint, but also from a player standpoint. So the fact that the Bills are sandwiched between those teams, you are in very good company if you're the Bills offensive line last year from a run perspective. And then when you pair it with, Football Outsiders, or I guess, what is it, FTN Fantasies data now, when you look at like adjusted line stats and all these pieces, however you slice it, and this isn't to take anything away from the running backs, but the Bills offensive line was consistently creating displacement in space for running backs last year. Again, that number percentage there with 33.3% hit at the line of scrimmage, that means the Bills running backs were only getting hit at the line on roughly 1/3 of their carries last year. That is a very, very, very strong number. Another piece, when you talk about stuff percentage is the percentage of runs where a running back gains 0 or fewer yards. Well, not just a running back, but anybody gains 0 or fewer yards. The Bills had the lowest stuff percentage in the league last year at 12.9%. So again, ahead of everybody. The Eagles, another great offensive line, they had the 2nd lowest. They were at 14.2%. So a 1.3 percentage point difference, which is a decent jump there. Again, especially from like an overall talent standpoint, who they have on that roster for the Eagles versus the Bills. So no matter how you slice it last year, whether it was running back metrics or Josh Allen metrics or overall carries or, stats that speak more to the line of scrimmage, like hit at the line percentage and stuff percentage and all this kind of stuff, the Bills had a really strong run game last year. I don't see or anticipate that going anywhere. I do think this run game is going to be important because I think the passing identity of this offense is going to have to be kind of massaged out and felt out a little bit. I think we know what we have in Dalton Kincaid. Not that he's hit his ceiling or anything, but we know the type of player he can be. I think he'll continue to ascend and have a very good year this year. I think Khalil Shakir should see another uptick in his game. We know what Curtis Samuel can be And then it's like, okay, where does Keon Coleman fit? Where does Mac Hollins fit? Where does Dawson Knox fit? Where does MVS fit? Is it another receiver that's fitting in there somewhere? Is it Shorter? Is it Claypool? Is it Shavers? Isabella? Is it KJ Hamler? How much do the running backs get used in the pass game? So on and so forth. But I think we do have known quantities in the pass game and what they're going to be. And it's not the sexiest thing on paper. Like I talked about last week, there are schematic ways in which this pass game can work, but I think a lot of them tie into the run game, tying into marrying the run and the pass, making your play action passes look just like your regular runs to try and confuse the defense, suck in second and third level defenders. I think the run is going to be very important just for grinding out yards because it is successful for the Bills. I think the Bills are capable of grinding out on average on the year, like 4 to 6 yards per attempt. Last year, just for running back carries only, they were 8th in the league at 4.4 yards per attempt. I think that type of success can continue, and I think it needs to continue because I think you need to, again, build that pass game around your run game, like we talked about last week from a formation perspective, personnel perspective, alignment perspective, all of this kind of stuff. And I got some questions coming through. Ralph says, being told, this is per Eric Wood's podcast, apparently. Ralph said, being told McGovern when recruiting him during free agency that he would play center. Dallas drafted him to play the position, but injuries changed it. Yeah, he did have some center experience coming into Dallas. So maybe that's the nugget there that McGovern was told that he would play center. So he got 1 year at left guard, and we'll see. So again, this wasn't just, and I think it goes into what I was saying earlier. Like McGovern moving to center wasn't because they were like, oh man, we got rid of Morse. We got to figure out what to do now. McGovern, you're going to center. This is something they were comfortable with from the get-go. McGovern was spoken to about it, so he kind of knew what was going to happen. But again, VPG could ball out, and that could move McGovern back. So let's not throw that out there. But this isn't like a reactionary move to Morse going. They are comfortable with McGovern there at center. William saying that. Kokomung saying, do you think Josh plays more under center? Has it been him or the OC that dragged their feet on it? Oh, and Pistol could be a great fit. Don't get me started on Pistol. I want more Pistol. I think every team should run more Pistol. It's literally a perfect marriage and blend of shotgun stuff and under center stuff. It gives the running back a downfield track and the opportunity to get going vertically. And it also gives the quarterback the opportunity to hide the football, turn his back to the defense, and do some creative things with play action. I would love more Pistol in this offense. I pretty much every year, probably like end of September to mid-October, I usually tweet something along those lines. It's basically an evergreen tweet every year. I would like more Pistol. I don't know if it's been Allen or the offensive coordinator that's dragged their feet on the under center play action stuff. I do think Allen will play more under center this year just because I think it pairs well with what else I'm anticipating and expecting from the Bills offense. I just think, again, like I talked about last week, you're going to see more condensed formations and you're going to see an emphasis on running the football. I think that pairs well with more of an under center game. I think you will continue to see that element present in this offense. And I think that's kind of how they're going to operate. So again, I don't think it's going to be like a 15 percentage point increase, but I think overall you'll see a higher volume of snaps with Allen under center. And from a percentage standpoint, I feel like, actually, let me see what they were last year. The Buffalo Bills, they had a 73% shotgun rate last year. So they were under center on 27% of plays. I think, I know you didn't ask this, but I kind of want to play this game. I could see there being like a 5 to 6 percentage point swing, maybe even bigger. But again, last year they had a 73% shotgun rate. I think this year it's going to be mid 60s. I'm thinking like 65 to 67 maybe in terms of shotgun percentage. So I do expect there to be more of an under center element. And I think that under center element will also be paired with more of a play action piece. As RJ says right here, actually, they have to run more play action this year. They are great when they do. Most teams, most quarterbacks, all of their passing metrics from a raw perspective, advanced perspective, usually go up when they have play action. So just from like a general perspective, that's true. And then for Allen especially, it's even more true. I don't know what it is, but when he just has play action, again, under center play action specifically, I don't know if it just gets him into a better rhythm physically, but you watch him drop and his feet, his shoulders, his eyes, his arm motion, everything is upright and nice. I think it almost makes you think of like a hitter, the way like they get into a box and they have a certain routine to get themselves comfortable before they hit and they swing. I think Allen is like that with play action stuff. Like there's just something about that action that gets him comfortable. It gets him in tune. It gets him in rhythm and usually leads to good throws, whether it's underneath or in the intermediate or explosive ones downfield. So again, most quarterbacks do better with play action. Allen, especially from like a mechanic standpoint. And then on top of that, I think the Bills' run game and having a good run game will help the play action game even further. And I also think the play action game will be a way that the Bills will use that as a means to kind of generate explosives with this passing offense. So I think that's what we're going to see a little bit. And again, speaking of that, like I talked about, the Bills' run game metrics and all these pieces. And I want to tie that with an element that I talked about briefly last week, and it's good offenses and good rushing attacks using heavier personnel in some form or fashion to their benefit to focus on these mismatch creators. That's what I think the nature and essence of this Bills offense is going to be. They're not the sexiest on paper. I think there's a lot of questions for this Bills offense from a line perspective, but more so from the pass catchers and supporting cast perspective. I'm confident in Dalton Kincaid, but I think that's still the question. Like, is Kincaid going to elevate to be a true number one? Does Shakir take another jump? Is Curtis Samuel as advertised or maybe a little better or maybe a little worse? What do you get from every other receiver? Again, the Keon Coleman's, the Mac Hollins, the MVS, Claypool, Shorter, Shavers, Isabella, Hamler. Like there's questions from a pass catching perspective. And there's a mismatch element, though, still present because of the size that the Bills have when you pair their tight end room with their wide receiver room. That's why I think you're going to get more heavier personnel groupings from the Bills. That's why I think you're going to get more condensed formations, alignments, and aspects of this team where you can lean into the dual threat of both your tight ends and your wide receivers. Kincaid, we know what he is as a pass catcher, and he's functional as a run blocker, and he's willing in that way. And he can wash out and crush nickel corners, safeties. He can crack down on linebackers and move some edges a little bit. Again, he wasn't perfect last year. He has to get better, but because he's willing and because of his size and frame, he is functional there. Dawson Knox has gotten better each year as a blocker. We know what he can be as a pass catcher. And then you've got these dudes like Keon Coleman and Mac Hollins, who we don't know what Keon Coleman's going to be in the NFL because he hasn't taken a snap yet. And we know Mac Hollins is limited as a receiver, but big-bodied, good blocker, willing blocker. Similar aspect for Keon Coleman. MVS is a field stretcher, but also can be used as a power slot and a blocker. And then Curtis Samuel isn't a slouch as a blocker as well. Even Shakir can get some blocking done. I think what you're going to have is these pieces that are not the sexiest on paper and may not rack up a ton of stats, but they've got all this versatility and all this usage from a run and pass perspective. And teams that are finding success on offense and are finding success running the ball on offense, a lot of them are doing it by leaning into those mismatch creators that they have within their rosters on offense. So I wanted to break down several of the best teams when it came to running the ball last year in EPA per attempt and some of the pieces they lean into. First, in EPA per attempt for, again, this is just for running back carries only. I removed quarterback carries from it because that's a whole nother animal. And then, because again, then you have to remove scrambles and it becomes a larger convoluted question and piece. But the Miami Dolphins were first in EPA per attempt last year for running back carries. They had a 42% 21 personnel rate. So that's 2 running backs, 1 tight end. The reason they have that is because they have kind of, no disrespect, but like a knockoff version of what Kyle Shanahan has in San Francisco and Kyle Juszczyk. The Dolphins had that with Alec Ingold. I did a piece last year on that first game against Miami going into it in terms of scouting the Dolphins. Wherever Alec Ingold goes, that's a tough one to say. Usually the ball follows. Passing, running, a lot of pieces. I think going into like that first game against Miami in week 3 or whatever it was, like the first couple games that Miami had going into it, like 70% of their plays, like the ball followed Alec Ingold wherever he went. But they lean into him. He's a good blocker. He's athletic. He can get up the field. He can work underneath. He can function as a blocker and as a pass catcher. And again, he's got athleticism to kind of stretch the field, be a mismatch as a blocker against nickel corners or safeties or outside corners. He's a mismatch against a linebacker in terms of coverage or safeties in terms of coverage. So Miami leaning into that piece. And also for Miami, they also had a 9% 12 personnel usage rate last year. So 51 of the Dolphins' plays last year came in either 21 or 12 personnel. The Detroit Lions, second in EPA per attempt last year on the ground. And when you look at them, they were an 11 personnel team last year. So one running back, one tight end, three wide receivers, 64%, 11 personnel usage rate last year. But like I mentioned last week, their top two receivers in terms of snap rate after Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds and Donovan Peoples-Jones. Bigger bodied wide receivers who allow you to stay in 11 personnel because you don't have to bring another tight end onto the field because you've got these bigger bodied wide receivers that allow you to stay in, again, 11 personnel. So the defense is going to be like, crap, there's three wide receivers on the field. We got to be in nickel because we have to respect their ability as pass catchers and as receivers. But then the Lions can be like, cool, you're staying in nickel. We can also run the ball with these guys because they're functional run blockers in addition to being actually wide receivers and pass catchers. Arizona Cardinals, third in EPA per attempt last year for running back carries. 12%, 13 personnel usage rate. So one running back, three tight ends. That was the most in the league last year. And they also had a 21%, 12 personnel rate, which was 17, so kind of middle tier. But long story short, 33% of their plays came with either two or three tight ends on the field. Again, trying to create mismatches and running the ball successfully with it. The 49ers, fourth in EPA per attempt last year for running back carries. And like we talked about last week, 36%, 21 personnel usage rate, 11%, 22% usage rate. So just off of that, 47% of their snaps last year came with two running backs on the field. And the reason, or two backs on the field, the reason they have that and do that is because, well, Christian McCaffrey, but again, Kyle Juszczyk, because Kyle Juszczyk is this tremendous mismatch creator tool. That is probably the least talked about aspect of the San Francisco 49ers. I know there's Debo and there's Ayuk and there's Kittle and there's Shanahan and there's Purdy and there's Christian McCaffrey. Kyle Juszczyk is really the straw that stirs that drink there. And Kyle Shanahan has talked about in the interviews. It was one of the priority pieces he made when getting in there. His versatility as a true run blocking fullback, but then what he also is as a pass catcher, they can line him up out wide. They can put him in motion. They can put him in the slot. They can send him on a rail route up the field. He is a mismatch as a blocker versus any defensive back. He's a good blocker against true thumping, run down, defending linebackers, but then he's also a mismatch in the pass against linebackers. So linebackers can't cover him. Defensive backs can't fit the run against him. So what do? And that's why the 49ers, again, 47% of their plays last year came with two backs on the field. 60% of their snaps came with either two tight ends or two backs on the field. They only had a 39% 11 personnel usage rate, which was 31st in the league last year. The Ravens were fifth last year in terms of EPA per attempt. Their offense is a bit of a unicorn, but 26%, 21 personnel usage rate, third highest last year. 10%, 20 personnel usage rate, highest in the league last year. 12%, 12 personnel usage rate last year. So 48% of their snaps came with either two tight ends or two running backs on the field last year. The Los Angeles Rams, sixth in EPA per attempt last year for running back carries. This is really where the discussion starts to get fun for the Rams in terms of what they do. They had a 95% 11 personnel usage rate last year. And that's fun when pairing it with their gap scheme runs, right? So 95% 11 personnel rate last year. So 95% of the time, they've got three receivers on the field, one running back, one tight end. The reason they're able to do that and be sixth in EPA per attempt for running back carries is because of Cooper Kupp and because of Puka Nacua. And even Tutu Atwell, who's a smaller, vertical, speed-based, jitterbug kind of guy, he was a willing blocker last year when you go back and you watch on tape. But the Rams have been doing this seemingly for forever under Sean McVay. Before it was Kupp and Puka, it was Kupp and Robert Woods. They've got these receivers who are plus matchups as pass catchers, but they're also effective blockers. You're watching Puka drive down or dig out safeties and linebackers and wash down defensive ends and cracking on guys. Kupp can do the same thing. Robert Woods was doing that before They're responsible for their gaps. They're closing. They won't even just wash down or climb regularly. They'll insert like almost like a tight end between a guard and a tackle and fit up on a linebacker in the hole and be kind of like a lead blocker while they're already attached to the line. Again, speaking to all those pieces, and the reason I mentioned the top six is because the Bills were seventh in EPA per attempt for running back carry. So I wanted to mention what the top six were doing. It's an aspect that they're starting to lean into more and more because it's not just enough to, which it never has been, it's not just enough to have like great players. It's always, you got to have some schematic adjustment, right? Or some schematic advantage. And the schematic advantage that a lot of the top offenses are leaning into is personnel groupings that allow you to get to more of the menu from a run and pass perspective without having to change your personnel. So the easiest way to think of it is literally think of like a menu or a dinner menu. And instead of having to turn the page to see more of the menu, there's more of the menu already listed on that current page that you're on. That's what teams are trying to get to. So the Niners with their, 21 personnel. And you think about what is 21 personnel. Okay, cool. So they've got McCaffrey and Juszczyk and Kittle. So that's, your three guys right there. Brock Purdy makes 4. Then you've got your offensive lineman, which makes 9. And then you've got Ayuk and you've got Debo. Guys that can literally go anywhere when you're talking, again, 11 on that entire side of the ball, but not including the 5 offensive linemen. Your 6 pass-catching eligible guys are George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk, Christian McCaffrey, Debo Samuel, and Brandon Ayuk. And those guys can get used in any way, shape, or form, right? You can put Debo in the backfield if you want and give him the ball. You could start anybody out in the backfield and motion him out wide. George Kittle is a plus matchup as a run blocker, but he's also a good pass-catching tight end. We talked about Juszczyk. McCaffrey is a runner and as a receiver. All of these, again, mismatch creation pieces. Miami, for as much as it was Hill and Waddle, well, Waddle was banged up last year, but they're not this team that lived in 11 personnel. 42% of the time they had 2 backs on the field, and it was, Mostert and Alec Ingold or Achane and Alec Ingold. 51% of their plays came either with 2 backs on the field or 2 tight ends on the field. So they're more of a heavier personnel team. Again, McDaniel comes from that Shanahan tree. Makes sense. But then we talked about the Lions with 11, the Cardinals with 13. We talked about the Niners, talked about the Ravens, talked about the Rams. It's just having personnel groupings that allow you to get to more of the menu without having to turn the page. And the turn the page equivalent is changing your personnel, right? So if you have to turn the page to go from the entrees to the dessert, that's the equivalent of, okay, let's get our fullback out of there and let's put another receiver out there. Let's go from 21 personnel to 11 personnel because we want to pass the football. The Niners don't really have to do that. They can stay in 21 because Kyle Juszczyk is a competent pass catcher. Now, if you factor that in with the Bills, they can stay in 12 personnel because they can run the ball out of 12 with Kincaid and Knox. They can also pass the ball out of 12 with Kincaid and Knox. Their 11 personnel rates is also what I'm excited to see because you can be an 11 and your 11 can be Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and Mac Hollins. And you've got 3 good run blockers, 2+ run blockers, but then you also have to respect them as pass catchers. And then your running back can be James Cook. So he can run the ball, or maybe, I don't know, you shift before the snap or you motion him out and it becomes more of a pass catching piece, right? There's, again, more of the menu you can get to without having to change your personnel. I think that's what the Bills offense is going to look like more of this year. And then you take those matchup creators or those matchup advantages that you potentially have and you pair them formationally and from an alignment perspective. And I'm going to expect to see more condensed formations, very much Sean McVay-esque, Los Angeles Rams-esque, where you're in 11 personnel and you can just get vertical on a team from a run game perspective and mash them and just blow them off the ball because you know what? Your 3 wide receivers, again, are Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, and Keon Coleman. Maybe you motion on right before the snap, you fast motion Curtis Samuel out wide, or you put him on jet motion and run him across the formation to get a little indicator, and then you run duo, or you run zone somehow, or split zone, or whatever you want to do, and you bring a tight end back across, or you motion Samuel and then bring him back on a little return motion. Like, you can get really creative in terms of identifying defenses, putting them into a bind, and you can get to both the run and the pass without having to change your personnel too much. I think that's really where the Bills' run game is going in this year in terms of mismatch creators, in terms of mismatch identifiers and exploiters. That's really what they have. They're not going to be, I don't think they're a pass catching group of just straight up walking buckets. They don't, for again, as much maligned as he was or is, they don't have Stephon Diggs anymore. They don't have a guy that can win down in and down out. They have to get a little creative with alignment, and I think you have to put defenses into a bind from a schematic and structural perspective. And I think that's where, again, this offense leads. So more condensed formations, more running right at teams and using combinations of 12 and 11 personnel. That's really where I think the Bills are going to live. I think the Bills are going to be in either 12 personnel, so one running back, two tight ends, or 11 personnel, one running back, one tight end, three wide receivers. But the formations that they run their plays out of, both 12 and 11, I think are going to look very similar because you've got this combination of pass catchers and blockers in your wide receiver room and your tight end grouping that allow you to run 11 personnel out of more traditional 12 personnel formations and alignments. And then you can run 12 personnel out of more spread or traditional 11 personnel formations or alignments. That's what I think the Bills offense leans into this year. Having actually, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Thomas puts it as like 11 and a half personnel. That's basically what it is. I think that's such a great way to put it. I'm mad at myself that I didn't think of it. That's great. I need to bookmark this and take a picture of it so I don't forget about it and I can reference it and give you credit during the season. That's basically what it is. Like their 11 and 12 personnel groupings are going to play similar to each other. And so their 11 personnel groupings, especially when they put the bigger body wide receivers out there, really can function more of like an 11 and a half personnel. And again, you can get to more of your spread passing attack type of offense. You can get condensed and go with more power looks. And like we talked about last week, when you go with those condensed formations, when you bring guys towards the line of scrimmage or attach them to the line of scrimmage, you're able to access more of the run game menu as well because you're adding gaps to your line because you're adding more bodies to or around that line of scrimmage. So now you can get to everything on the menu. You can go crack toss. You can go weak side zone. You can go strong side zone. You go inside zone. You can go duo. You can go power. You can go counter. You can do really anything and everything you want. The full complement is there because of how many bodies you have close to or attached to the line of scrimmage. And that's where the Bills are going to be. They're going to live in that 11 and a half personnel, which is how, again, now maybe they go smaller with their 11 at times, right? Maybe it's MVS, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir. And that's more of a true 11 personnel type of grouping, right? But when they go with those bigger bodied receivers, and again, we'll see who makes the roster from the receiver perspective. But when they go with Coleman and Hollins and MVS or Coleman and Hollins and Curtis Samuel, and hell, then even if Dalton Kincaid is the one tight end in that regard, you can go true spread with that if you want to. You can put Keon Coleman and Matt Collins in your slot and have like two power slots who are good run blockers. And you can put Dalton Kincaid out wide, or you can line up trips to one side and have Dalton Kincaid on the backside as the X by himself, and then make the defense go, okay, how are you covering Dalton Kincaid? Are you doing it with a corner? Are you doing it with a safety? Are you doing it with a linebacker? Cool. Are you tipping your hand that it's man coverage here? There's all these domino effects and questions that the defense has to answer that they either don't want to answer or might not have an answer to. And that's where I think the Bills find success this year. That's where I think the Bills live. And again, that's where I think they have to. This JP said it on last week's episode, and it was a tremendous way to phrase it. This offense this year is a bet on Joe Brady and Josh Allen because you've got mismatch creators, you've got mismatch potential and pieces within that lineup. It's going to be on Joe Brady to push the right buttons and pull the right levers at the right time. And it's going to be on Allen to distribute the ball effectively, process what's going on, have his pre-snap and post-snap cues and reads accurate, timely, and clean, and then have his mechanics tied in with that as well. But this run game, again, I think this run game is going to be tremendously important to this offense. I'm not going to say it's going to be the foundation of the offense because I think Josh Allen is the low-hanging fruit foundation of this offense. But I think the run game is going to be tremendously important this year. I think we're going to see more of a Josh Allen run game as well from a design standpoint. Using him, I mean, he's a mismatch creator in and of himself. But using Allen in terms of a +1 in that run game and getting at defenses that way, I think this run game is going to be a heavy focal point in this offense. Um, and then using that to get defenses out of these coverage structures that they've been getting into the past several years, using it to put defenses into a bind from a personnel standpoint, and then using whatever they don't do against them. Cool. You want to stay in nickel personnel against our 12 personnel? Cool. We're going to run the ball right at you. Okay, cool. Now you want to match with a big nickel or a third linebacker? Cool. We're going to pass the ball because we don't think that dude that you brought in can cover Dawson Knox or Dalton Kincaid. And then same conversation for 11 or 11 and a half personnel, as Thomas said, right? If you sit there and you want to match that 11 personnel with the bigger bodied wide receivers and you want to match it with nickel, cool. Do you have that nickel corner who can mash with Keon Coleman if we put him in the slot and he blocks him? Like, oh, you don't? Okay, cool. So now what do you do? Because that 11 personnel grouping can be a threat from a pass perspective. So you probably have to stay in nickel or dime, but then that puts the onus on your defensive back grouping because you need to have dudes that can mash and fit the run against those bigger bodied physical receivers. And all of this, I say all of this to say where I think they're going, but in order to really take advantage of all of this, right? These mismatch creators, they have to be viable in both the pass and the run. Like in order for Dalton Kincaid to be this true mismatch creator, he can be a mismatch creator as a receiver, right? Because of his size and frame and athleticism. Like, do you cover him with a corner? Do you cover him with a linebacker or a safety? Can you, so on and so forth. But to really unlock him and take advantage of his skill set, having him being able to function as a run blocker and pass catcher is truly unlocking him. And I think that's a similar conversation for Keon Coleman. I think that's a similar conversation for Matt Collins and like MVS and even Dawson Knox. Like having these bigger bodied guys, it's not just about, oh, well, they can mash dudes in the run. Because if they're going to come on the field and they're not a threat to catch the football, they're not a threat as a pass catcher, then you don't have to worry about them in the pass game. Then you can go to heavier personnel groupings defensively, or you can sell out versus the run because you're like, I don't care. Like that dude is not a threat as a pass catcher. We'll be fine. And then vice versa, right? If they're only a threat as a pass catcher and you're like, oh, they're not a threat as a blocker. We can stay in nickel and our slot corner can run right through Dalton Kincaid's chest or run right through Keon Coleman. We're gonna be fine. You need those guys to function in both the run and the pass to truly take advantage of all of these further options that are placed on the menu, right? Because the whole idea of why teams have to turn the page and switch personnel groupings is because, all right, we want to be able to run the football. Let's get a fullback out there, or let's get another tight end out there. Oh, we want to be able to throw the football. Let's get another receiver out there. Being able to put defenses in a true bind and being able to access more of the menu without having to turn the page means you've got personnel groupings that you can just stay in and you can run the ball or pass the ball and be equally effective or viable in either or both. Like that's what it is. And I think that's where the true advantage of this offense lies this year. Like if it's really clicking, it's just because you're able to put defenses into a bind schematically with the matchup pieces and who you have, where it's, again, oh man, they're in 12. Oh, they can run the ball out of this and they can pass out of it. What are we going to do? And again, with the type of 12 and 11 personnel packages that the Bills can have this year, you can be tight, condensed, power type, heavy type formations and alignments and do it out of 11 personnel. Or you can be in 12 personnel and be aligned in more of a spread passing option because of what Knox and Kincaid can both do as pass catchers. So there's a lot of real fun potential schematic advantages that Brady and this offense can potentially create. Let me go to. Sophia says all these giant pass catchers are going to be so much fun to watch. I can't wait for the season already. Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm nervous. And again, it's a departure, right? Like they're the type of guys that Allen has won with. I'm going to continue to say this all off season, like the Cole Beasleys and the Stephon Diggses of the world. These true separators aren't necessarily prevalent across this roster. They've gone in a different direction with these bigger bodied schematic mismatch, matchup creation, matchup advantage takers that they have in terms of auxiliary and support pieces on this offense, which isn't bad. It just requires a different direction for them to go in. And I think pairing that type of size and athleticism and frame that they have in the tight end and wide receiver room pairing it with a strong power run game allows you to unlock more of the passing game as well and put defenses into a true bind. That's going to be really fun. Ralph says, how about a two-back set, then splitting Cook out in motion? Of course, running out of it a little also. They did it a bit last year, right? Ty Johnson and James Cook and those pony personnel looks. Pony personnel is when your two backs on the field are actually two running backs, which is why I clarified earlier with Juszczyk and McCaffrey when I said, 21 personnel because you got two running backs. Technically, Kyle Juszczyk is a fullback, so 21 personnel is just two backs. But when you've got that pony personnel, yeah, maybe it's James Cook and Ty Johnson. Maybe it's James Cook and Ray Davis. Could be Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. Yeah, maybe you've got Davis and Cook both in the backfield. You motion Cook, you split them out wide, or you put Cook in the slot and you have Ray Davis stay in to pass protect. And you can get really creative with a lot of these pieces. And I think that's also what I think the Bills need to do. They have to get creative with their formations, with their alignments, with motion, with play action, with personnel. Like, I don't think they have like anybody who's a walking bucket, really. I think Kincaid can be that and has shown some good flashes of it, but they don't really have an ISO ball dude, or to use a basketball reference here. They don't have anybody where like, all right, cool, just clear it out. Let him take this guy one-on-one. We got it. You've got to have some good off-ball movement. You've got to have a good screen game, no pun intended. I think there's a lot of options for this offense, but it's gonna start with the schematics and the bones and the structure of it and how it all gets dressed up because of the sum of the parts and how it all has to go through there. Sal saying Allen's gonna have much more responsibility with checks, in my opinion. I wonder, and two, because if you pair it with these personnel groupings and motion and stuff, you have the opportunity to identify defensive coverages pre-snap. And then, do they motion someone out or do they shift? And Allen reads what's happening and he knows it's man coverage and they had a zone coverage play call, so he checks to a man beater or vice versa. Or is Brady just scheming things up to a point where Allen doesn't really need a check, where it's schemed up and he knows the play is going to the running back out of the backfield. But if the defense comes out and presents this way or does this, that means that running back is going to get taken away. So he's going to a second or third option right away because he kind of knows everything from a pre-snap recognition process because of how the play is designed and schemed. So it's going to be fun. It could be fun. I think this is for me. Thomas saying wing preference, drums or flats. I'm a drums kind of guy. Flats are fine. I just think you get more, I could be wrong on this too. I just think you get more meat on the drum. You get that big like chunk. It's also easier to rip off and just like dip into the blue cheese, or you can leave it on the wing and dip in the blue cheese. And then like, I'm a drums guy. I am a drums guy. David coming in saying Allen is going to run through the progression early in the season until these wide receivers learn where they need to be. Yeah, I do think there's going to be some growing pains for this offense. I don't know how much Keon Coleman's going to factor in. I'm hoping some of the familiarity that Samuel has with Joe Brady allows him to kind of hit the ground running a little bit. And even just from all of that, I do think this offense on the year, I think it's going to function through Dalton Kincaid from a pass perspective. I think James Cook is going to be heavily involved as both a runner and as a receiver. But I think early on, in terms of guys who touch the ball that are not Josh Allen, I think it's going to rely on Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, and James Cook. Not necessarily in that order, but I think those are going to be your three heavy lifters to kind of give Allen support. And then maybe you get some gadget stuff from Curtis Samuel. Maybe they line him up in the backfield and run, a Texas route out of the backfield, or, hand him off the ball, or do some jet motion or some orbit stuff to kind of get him the ball and some different looks, or run some screens to Keon Coleman. But I do think as everybody gets acclimated to one another, gets adjusted to being in this Joe Brady system and really starts to see, we really start to see how the pieces all fit once the bullets go live and everything starts flying. I do think Allen's going to lean on the known quantities that he's got so far, which again is Kincaid, Shakir, and James Cook. But again, yeah, that's the large crux of it. I just look for them to be in 12 personnel, but be able to run, spread and pass stuff out of it, in addition to having both tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage and running power run stuff. When they're in 11 personnel, they could be in spread and, run those type of concepts, or they can have the receivers tight to the line or attached to the line and run more power stuff and get downhill. Just with the size and frame and athleticism and ability to catch the football and block in the run game for a lot of these wide receivers and the tight ends in this Bills grouping, they have the option to again, access more of the menu without having to turn the page in either personnel grouping. And I think that's where they start. And then you start with the run game from there to make defenses respect it, to make them come out of those coverage structures, to make them have to make a decision from a personnel standpoint. And then you can kind of use those answers against them and make them wrong even when they're right. And that's going to be really a fun conversation as we continue to have going forward this year. And hopefully once we are in this season. Yeah, Sal says it. Offense will be like a box of chocolates this year. Nice. Yeah, so it'll be a good time. Want to show some love for the sponsor here, One Pie Pizza. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, or they're here on YouTube and or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese. They have a pizza that was named after Cover One. It's the Cover One Allen Goat. It is absolutely delicious. They also do a lot of drives and initiatives for the city of Buffalo and the community at large. So they're good people making really great food. Go get yourself some One Pie Pizza. I don't say that they're the best because I partnered with them. I partnered with them because I think they're the best pizza. So go get yourself some. Again, all their information, online menu, and all that stuff with their site can be found in the episode show notes. So they're here on YouTube and or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. Love this comment from Thomas. He says, love One Pie. Yes, One Pie is absolutely tremendous. David says, do they deliver to Arizona? You know what? You'd probably have to pay a pretty penny. But I feel like they could, that technology exists, right? I don't want to sound like an idiot, but like they could like flash freeze a half sheet and send it. I think that's a thing. It's probably going to cost way too much, but it's probably worth it because they're delicious. I just always think back to, I don't remember how she does it, but in Fools Rush In, the movie with Selma Hayek and Matthew Perry, where they're in Vegas, he loves Grace Papaya, the hot dog spot in New York, and she gets him some brought in from New York to Vegas for his birthday, and they eat them while like sitting in the Grand Canyon. Granted, that's a movie, but that was like the mid-90s. I feel like it's possible. Like they're just going to have to fly it to you somehow, and it's going to cost a lot. Man, it was 103 in Arizona. I can't do that kind of heat. I'll melt. And even if it's a dry heat, like what I always say, like, oh, in Houston or Dallas or, in Arizona, New Mexico, it's more of a dry heat. It's not humid like Florida. It's still hot, man. Like if I open up the oven, it's not humid in that oven, but the heat is real, and that crushes me. Oof. I think you should legitimately, though, like I'm going to actually ask the next time I go in there, kind of as a joke, but kind of what to see. I think you should call and ask for it. Yeah, Thomas says go for it. Yeah, I kind of want to see what happens. I'm going to ask the next time I go in there and be like, hey, I just want to know what the process would be like. If they ever encounter that, or if they have an answer, like, yeah, we could freeze it and send it FedEx, like FedEx Air. We could send this pizza, but it'll cost a pretty penny, but we'll see what happens. Oh, moving back to the 716 soon. Good luck on your move. I hate moving, let alone going like cross country, essentially. So good luck with that and Godspeed with that. I wish you the best. Moving stresses me out like absolute crazy. Again, let alone a move of the moving from New York City back to Buffalo and vice versa, from Buffalo to New York City, then New York City back here, stress the hell out of me. I can't imagine going to Arizona, from Arizona to Buffalo, or from Buffalo to Arizona, which I'm guessing is what you did when you're saying moving back to the 716. Not to stress you out any further, but yeah, that stresses me out just thinking of it. But yeah, call One Pie, see what they can do. I'm going to throw up the banner that says Toodles, folks. I know this may seem shocking and crazy. We're only an hour and 13 in. But we are, David says, moving is easier than 103-degree temps. I feel you on that one. Man, that heat is just absolutely real. I know this is a bit of a shorter episode of Disguise Coverage, especially compared to last week's where we went 2 hours. And we've done a lot of these marathon pieces. But yeah, a little bit of a shorter one today. I've got a lot of moving parts and pieces going on and things out there. So a little bit of a shorter episode tonight, but I hope you folks enjoyed this episode. If you have not already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. Whether you're here live now, before you leave, please drop a like on this video. Or if you are watching not live, post live later, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. Again, likes are the lifeblood of these streams. They go a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. So if you are on your way out now, after watching live, please drop a like on this video. If you're watching later, please drop a like on this video. If you're listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool too. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage on the podcasting apps and platforms. Please rate and review kind of anywhere and everywhere you are listening to this show on. If you're here on YouTube, turn on notifications for the Disguise Coverage playlist. Subscribe to the Cover One channel. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about this show and about how awesome it is. If you thought the show was terrible or that I'm awful, tell your enemies about the show and try and make them watch it instead. This is this is a good comment from Ralph, who says, "Sounds like the pie will be cooked by the time it gets to you, Thomas." Oh, they will to David. And then David says it'll warm up in the UPS truck on the way here. I like that. That's very good. Well done. Well done. I appreciate you folks. Tune into the Cover One Film Room with myself, and Eric Turner tomorrow, live 5 p.m. Eastern, where we are going to be breaking down Mr. Cedric Van Pran Granger. See, I can only say it if I really slow it down and focus on it. It's rough, but yeah, we'll be breaking down Mr. SVPG in the film room tomorrow. Skill set, traits, strengths, areas of opportunities, projection, all that kind of stuff. Until next week, live next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Disguise Coverage. That'll do it for us here on this show in this episode. I appreciate all the kind words and everything coming through. I don't like to pull, I say it all the time, but just in case you don't know, I don't like to pull up comments and positive stuff for myself, especially when I'm solo, because I feel like it's corny. Like there's not a producer in the back who's like clicking on it. Like I'm clicking on positive stuff for myself about myself to put on the show, which seems kind of corny, but I see all the kind words coming through in the chat, and I sincerely appreciate all of them. So that'll do it for us here in this episode of Disguise Coverage. Please drop likes, please rate and review and subscribe. Tell your family and friends and loved ones, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully, I haven't checked for likes now. I really don't like to do it. Oh man, who downvoted this? Well, that's fair. To each their own. Appreciate you folks. Godspeed. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Disguise Coverage, and or tomorrow night, live Wednesday, May 29th, 5 p.m. Eastern for another episode of the Cover One Film Room. So until either of those, I will see you when I see you. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.